recorded.
To this workshop regarding or focus on square foot gardening at schools. So this is one of the square foot gardening is a method that we use in order to produce food in an intensive way, and is also a way that helps us to use our available space in schools in an efficient form. So during this workshop, I will be focusing on the method itself and also on some experiences that I have applying these methods in elementary schools. And I hope that after this workshop, you will be able to take away some of these experiences and be motivated to create a diverse and dynamic garden, to cultivate year-round. Here in Vancouver, we are very lucky with our weather, and so we really can grow year-round. Perhaps in the north of BC, the things are different, but still there are some crops that are resistant or can stand cold weather, and it still could be a good way to grow vegetables. Also, some of my experiences about using the garden as a classroom, an outdoor classroom, and also some experiences of myself, how I integrate or link the garden with the curriculum that the students are learning in classrooms. So let's start briefly about who am I, and later we move on with the square foot gardening. So my name is Pablo Vimos, and I have a background in agronomy and landscape ecology. I host or facilitate weekly workshops on gardening in 2 elementary schools in Vancouver, 1 elementary school in Burnaby, and also I am the master gardener at Embark Learning Garden in SFU Burnaby campus. So yeah, most of my week is outdoors in the garden, looking after plants, which is quite nice. This is the garden that I look after in Burnaby. This garden allows us to grow food in small spaces. And this garden, as any garden that I work with, have small spaces or garden beds to grow food. These garden beds in this case are 3 feet by 4 feet wide, is the size of a pallet, industrial pallet. This garden has 60 garden beds, has a gathering area, toolboxes, a composter, and some fruit trees for communal use. So something similar also happens in any school that I work with. We have the garden beds, and also we have either picnic tables or a learning circle where we gather and learn, and also we can later do hands-on in the garden. So let's start with what we got at the schools. At the schools, we get a garden bed full of soil. And when I ask the students what is soil, the first thing they tell me it is dirt. So, so since I have my background in agronomy, so soil for me is any element that allows me to grow food. But when you start talking about dirt, and so I would like to make a bit of clarification about that. So soil is the good stuff, is where is rich in nutrients, rich in microorganisms, and allows us to grow food. Dirt, on the contrary, is a soil that is sterile. It means has little organic matter and has lots of minerals. So that's why I call this as a mineral soil. So in this pie chart, that is what a mineral soil is made of. As you can see, it has little organic matter, 5%. 45% of the soil is made of minerals, whether rocks. Usually we talk about clay, sand, and lime, or silt, and 25% is air and 25% is water. So air and water are in the same percentage because is the amount of porosity that we have in the soil. All right, so this type of soil we don't use in our school gardens. In our school gardens, we use what we call man-made soil. It's a soil that is commercially available, and it's a soil that has 20 to 25% sand and 70 to 80% organic matter. So our soil is man-made and is rich in organic matter. All right, so that's very important. So it's what we really call soil, and it's rich in nutrients. It retains water because of the organic matter, and because of the organic matter as well has a crumbly structure. So if you go back to your garden, and the structure of your garden should be like a chocolate cake, very nice and crumbly. So most of the schools that I work with, this soil has been filled in the garden beds, and we have no say on that. So sometimes the soil is good, sometimes the soil is too much rich in sand, so we have to keep adding year after year organic matter. But what we want to achieve is that a soil is rich in organic matter, and therefore we will have good crops. All right, so the next is we get garden beds. All right, so as I mentioned, in Vancouver, the school district has decided that all garden beds should be made of wood, lumber, 4x4, and the garden beds have to have a dimension of 4 feet wide by 8 feet long. These garden beds don't have a bottom, so the water drain freely, and and it's filled with soil. All these garden beds are sit on a grounded level, grounded soil. So this is one. In this case, we have the Bonavie School District. They have decided to go with horse troughs or metal garden beds. All right, so these metal garden beds are 2 feet wide by 6 feet long, and as well filled with soil. And here I would like to point out that the type of material of which the garden bed is made has an effect on how you're going to produce food. In the previous case, wood is a good insulator, and so the soil warms up very quick in the spring and cools off late in the winter. On the contrary, here the metal garden beds, the metal doesn't retain heat, so this soil inside this garden bed gets very cold very quick. So during the winter, this garden bed is very cold. So recently, many gardeners are deciding to use styrofoam to line these garden beds and kind of create a space to keep the soil warm as long as possible. This garden bed has a bottom which prevents the free drainage of water. We have a spouting here. So most of these garden beds in metal tubs have to have a layer of gravel at the bottom. Gravel and landscape fabric and soil on top of it. So gravel and soil has to be separated in order to prevent that the soil filling up the pores or the spaces in the gravel and all becomes difficult to drain. So this is also, these garden beds need to be placed on top of sleepers. So there are some pieces of wood in here. They are made of lumber, 4x4 inches lumber. So it shouldn't be direct contact between the ground and the garden bed. Again, is in order to prevent that the soil in the garden bed lose heat during the winter. One thing that we should take care of these metal garden beds is that during the summer they get very, very hot. The metal transfer energy, and sometimes I'm reminded myself when I lean against these metal frames and I feel the heat and burn my arms. So yeah, we have to be aware of that. I understand that in Surrey School District, they have gone with plastic garden beds. And as well, I think there are also self-watering garden beds. I haven't had experience on growing this yet, but I think the same has to be, they have to be placed in an area that is a level. I will talk about that. What's the reason? So here I have an example of self-watering garden beds. You might be familiar with a company called Live Space Gardens, and they build these beautiful garden beds made of wood, and the thing of these garden beds is that they need to be at level. So if you have a garden bed that is self-watering, they have to be at level. With other garden beds that are not self-watering, never mind if they're a bit tilted to one side, they are following the slope of the playground, doesn't matter, the water will drain. But here, since they are self-watering, we need that the reservoir at the bottom of the garden bed needs to be a level. So that is the reason is that the water will go up through capillarity into the soil, and homogeneously the soil gets moist. But if we have this garden bed tilted to one side, the water won't drain, the excess of water will not drain through the existing spout, and that area of the garden bed gets waterlogged. And then later we will see in our garden, in our plants, not growing happily. In the other side, that there is no water at all, the plants will dry out very quick. So just if you are planning to use self-watering garden beds, make sure they are at level. Otherwise, you will have to empty the garden bed and level it up so you don't have those problems with watering. All right, so far here I have talked about a bit of soil and a bit of garden beds. So I would like next to talk about how we approach cultivating those garden beds. So it's very common as a standard practice that we tend to use rows in order to grow produce. And what we do, we just in a garden bed make a small drill, 1 inch deep, sometimes less, and then we sprinkle the seeds and cover with soil, water, and we wait till the seeds germinate. With this happens that with this approach, we can use all the seeds that comes in a packet. Sometimes in a packet comes between 150 to 300 seeds. We can use all these seeds, 300 seeds in this 4 feet wide row. And you can see in this picture, most of the lettuces are very, very much crowded. And there is no space for growing. So just remember that a plant needs water, nutrient, sunlight, and space. And that's sometimes what we forget, that plants need a space in order to grow.
Pablo?
Yep.
Sorry, we have our first question for you.
Sure.
Is it a good idea to line good boxes with rocks, cardboard, or newspaper, etc., like metal boxes for drainage? Also, have you ever had success moving the boxes? There are two questions.
So regarding the first question, if I come at the bottom of the hose trough or the metal, put some rocks and newspaper, cardboard, it will work as long as the cardboard will get wet and allow the water to drain. I will say don't put a huge piece of cardboard. Perhaps you tear it off so water can seep between the pieces of cardboard. Yeah, and If I have been successful in moving garden beds, yes. Yes, I have done these metal tops that I showed. I empty the soil and remove what is the landscape fabric. Again, remove the gravel and place them back as I would like them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back. I was talking about growing in rows. So usually we tend to drop the seeds in this row that we have made, and we try to more or less drop seeds each 1.5 centimeters for the small crops. With the small crops, I talk about lettuce, carrots, radishes, pak choi, and 2.5 centimeters for larger crops. And with that, I refer like cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, kale. And then as well, as the standard growing in rows says that we make a row and later we leave 30 centimeters in between or 25 centimeters in between and make another row. And so, and that space that we leave empty between these 30 centimeters usually gets filled with weeds. And then that we have to do lots of weeding. As you might have read in all the packets, seed packets, they say it's germinate, and after having 2 pairs of true leaves, you need to thin to the right distance. Well, I don't do that. And at the school, teachers that are looking after the garden, there is no time to go and do that. So most of the times we end up with crowded rows, lots of vegetables fighting for nutrients and space and sunlight and water because we don't have time to do the thinning. So with the approach that I'm going to talk about, the square foot gardening, we're going to address this thing, which is the space for each of these vegetables. So let's focus on the square foot gardening. This method was developed in 1975, and the person that developed was an engineer moving from construction into gardening, and he wants to optimize the space that he has for growing vegetables. So that is why the reason is quite organized. So here is a picture of the garden bed with a square foot gardening approach. So in order to talk about the square foot gardening, I will be talking about the garden beds. What is the difference with the usual ones? How we plant. You might have heard about the companion planting, how we use the companion planting in this kind of system. What is the crop rotation for this kind of system? And how we plant. So let's start with the basics. The basics is a garden bed. This approach tells you how to build a garden bed. In our case, for the schools, we have a garden bed, so we don't focus on that. Fill the garden bed with a rich soil. So also this book gives you a recipe, how to mix soil, how to create your own soil. For us at the schools, we get the soil that we get. There's not much work on that. But what makes difference is that we must divide the garden bed in 1 by 1 feet in squares or squares which are 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, like in this case in here. So we have to divide the garden bed. And then in each square, we plant a different crop. So in this square that I'm highlighting here, we have 12 squares. So I can plant up to 12 different crops. All right. And once I harvest 1 square, add a bit of compost and plant immediately. So, so this system is what I call is diverse and dynamic. diverse, you can plant up to 12 different crops. And dynamic is because you are growing, harvesting and planting, harvesting and planting, harvesting and planting. So it's a constant going, it's an ongoing gardening, which has some challenges. I will focus that later. It has some challenges in going in that system. As I mentioned, space is very important. Here in this picture, you can see those carrots. They were planted too close together, and they are what we call organic carrots, all twisted. They are, most of the time at gardening, we expect to have produce with supermarket standards. Okay, and so in the organic gardening, we rarely get supermarket standards. So the core of the square foot gardening is in the planting space. And this is where we spend most of the time teaching to students in the schools how to plant. For instance, the square foot gardening groups the plants, the vegetables, in 4 groups, depending their size when they are mature. So small plants like arugula, carrots, onions, scallions, radishes, we put 16 plants in a square. Medium plant size, like a mustard, pak choy, spinach, we put 9 plants in a square. Large plants like a kohlrabi, lettuce, shallot, Swiss chard, we put 4 plants in a square. And extra large plants like a broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, and kale, we put only 1 plant per square. So when I'm introducing this system to the students, I always talk about the t-shirt size. You go from small to extra large, and in each is as a comparison with the size of the plants. So this is what is the square foot gardening. With this approach, we make sure that each plant has a space where to grow. And therefore, we also are conscious of how many squares we should plant. So do you remember that I mentioned when we plant in rows, you can very much easy use all your 300 seeds or 150 seeds from the packet in 4 square feet. Now with this approach, if you use 2 seeds in each spot, you will be using 32 seeds per a square. So let's say that you like to plant radishes in here. So you have 16 radishes. And you say, well, I don't want to only plant 1 square. Let's plant 2 squares. So now you go to 32 radishes. And if you go 3 squares, you go to 48 radishes. And then you can ask to your students, how many radishes do you eat in a week? And also, if you're a bit curious, you will go to the supermarket and you will notice that in a bunch of radishes, you have 8 radishes in a bunch.
Pablo,
So, yep.
We have 2 more questions. The
Sure.
first one, do you plant seeds or transplants in this?
Good question. Depends. I like to start the gardening season with transplants. It means that I start indoor, all the seeds, and when the weather comes, I move it to transplants. It's also easier for the students to handle the seeds, the plants, and have transplants have an instant impact in the garden. It's really, really instant. You have an empty garden bed, and when you leave, there is lots of plants in there, so you can see that. Yeah.
Okay, following question. And what if you are in a more northern climate? Good transplants speed up your growing season?
Okay, can you repeat, please?
Yeah. If you are in a more northern climate,
Okay.
Good transplants speed up your growing season?
Well, if you're up north, yes, I will wait. I will use still transplants. I still use transplants. Seeds, we will have to wait till the soil gets warm, a bit above 6 degrees Celsius, and also we have to make sure that we don't have a frost coming. For instance, that is very important to know the last frost date. For instance, in Vancouver, we know the last frost is around March 28th. So now now we are in April, and if I go out and put seeds, I will be sure that the seeds will germinate nicely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So finishing with this planting space, this is the core of the square foot gardening. So we spend lots of time on this, and I have an exercise like hopefully we can look into that. All right, so we have this nice this picture with this garden all dividing in squares, and the square foot gardening says, okay, you plant a different crop in each square, okay? And then is where the companion planting gets in. For instance, I will say that I want to put here in this corner beans. Also in these other square beans, let's put these 4 squares beans, okay? And what is the other vegetable that grows well with beans? So that is what we call the good companion. And here we have a list of carrots, corn, cucumbers, and so others. And we also tell us which plants don't go well with the beans, in particularly all the onions. So that's very important. So you won't plant onions next to the beans. So that's how the square foot gardening allows us to use the companion planting at the best. I know that when we do row planting, we as well can use that. So you have one row of one vegetable, you look for that vegetable in this companion planting chart, and more or less look for the best companion, and you plant that. So that's how we use the companion planting. And yeah, that's now the companion planting. I don't have this is not a full table. You can find that on the internet. There are several gardeners that share the companion planting. Another concept that we have is crop rotation. And everyone that do gardening says that you have to rotate your crop. You cannot plant the same crop twice because the soil gets, the nutrients in the soil are not enough for the second crop. And if there were pests, that crop had pests, the pests still are in there. So the pests will attack to your new crop. So that's why the reason we do crop rotation. But how we do the crop rotation? So here I have created this cycle, which is this crop rotation, which start with a leaf. Let's say that we plant lettuce or cabbage or Swiss chard. Once I harvest that, I should be planting peas, beans, faba beans, which are our legumes, which also we call soil builders because it adds nitrogen to the soil. Once I harvest the legumes, I plant roots, beets, carrots, radishes, turnips. Once I harvest turnips, I plant fruits, all the fruits, cucumber, tomato, peppers, and then go back to leaves. So if we go back to this garden bed, if I have planted, let's say, leaves in here, I will put some peas. I will follow with peas. I will follow with beans or faba beans. If I planted tomatoes, I will put leaves again. So this crop rotation allows us to identify and select the crops that will follow after harvesting. So that's very important. So I know that other types of crop rotation looks into the carrot family or onion family or the brassicas family, but I decided to use the leaves because it's much understandable. Because when we work with the students, we say, oh, which part of this plant you eat? and they very much identify with the leaves, with the stems, or we eat the roots, or we eat the fruits. Yeah. The only confusion that we always have is with the legumes. Is it a leaf or is it a fruit? Well, you know that it is a fruit. All right, so the next basic, as well core of this square foot gardening is the way how we plant. So if you recall, we have grouped our vegetables in 4 categories, and in each category we have a different pattern. So for instance, here in this graph, I have a 3 columns by 3 rows pattern, which again, if you are talking with the students, if you are teaching mathematics, you will talk about arrays. So you have a 3 by 3 array, or a 4 by 4 array, or a 2 by 4 array. Okay, so in this case, we have a 3 by 3. And we use our finger to make small holes. And we make sure that the hole is no deeper than your fingernail. That's very, very important. Because when we talk to the children, with the students, to make a hole for a seed, they will put a full finger deep. And then they will plant a radishes or a carrot, which are tiny seeds, and the seed runs out of energy before it can go up the soil. So no deeper than a fingernail. The second is we drop in each spot, we drop 1 to 2 seeds. Is for all, except for carrots. Carrots are very finicky, and not all the carrot seeds are viable. So you need to put 4 to 5 seeds. Sometimes it's just small pinch, because carrot seeds are very tiny. I usually give carrot seeds to 6, 7 graders to test their patience, because with them we work that gardening builds you to be patient, teach you to be patient. There is no rush in finishing, putting seeds in everywhere, and the garden takes time to grow and develop. So 4 to 5 seeds for radishes. I don't know if you had experience to grow a mustard or arugula. Trying to pinch 2 seeds from that is quite difficult. So a small pinch. If sometimes I have seen that we go to the garden center and we get a packet of seedlings, and in a cell we can find sometimes with beets. We have 8 beets in this cell, and I advise to split them because each plant needs a space. So avoid taking the cell from the packet and just plant it in the soil, because now you have all these 8 or 10 beets fighting for a space. So again, don't be sorry, just split them, 1 plant at a time, and you plant it. So that is, for instance, where we have onions, beets, peas, corn, that you can find as seedlings. And other thing that the square foot gardening really focuses in the way we water. We water the soil. The soil is the water, not the plant. Even when we use a hose, we try to water the soil. And most of the times I use a nozzle that is only shower. So no other spray nozzle. No, it has to be a shower nozzle. So that prevents watering the plant. We have to water the soil. So, and by watering the soil and not the leaves, we reduce what we call the black blind in potatoes, the blind in tomatoes, the mildew in cucumbers. So we reduce the amount of disease and infections. All right, so the square foot gardening, just a summing up, we have a garden bed. This garden bed we split in squares. In each square, we plant a different crop, and each square is planted with a different crop. As once it's harvested, we follow up with a different crop, and each crop is planted. The seeds are planted at different distances. Now, the square foot gardening says that the grid has to be part of the school, of the garden bed. But I found out that having a fixed grid in the garden beds is really difficult in schools. At the start, I just nailed some string and make my grid. A week after, all the string was broken, or so it didn't last long. I decided to go to Home Depot and get where they throw away these straps, where the lumber comes all together. I used those straps. It's a very hard plastic. I nailed it. A week later, everything was pulled. So I decided in the school grounds, no grid. So now, if I don't have a grid, how I know that I had to plant in squares? So by that time, we had now what is called the square seeding. Is this green square in here? So I invested in that, and that I use as a template. So I take the square, push in the ground, and it gives me a nice template of a square. And then the students, depending on the crop that I provide them, and they make the holes and they drop the seeds and done. So this is the best way to keep the square foot gardening going in schools. Also, the square foot garden suggests one crop per square. And once you harvest that square, you plant something else. And they became very dynamic. It's very dynamic once you start harvesting and seeing that there are empty spots, and then you realize, oh, I don't have seeds, or I have to go and get seedlings, and then it gets all confused, and yeah, weeds start growing. So I decided that we should plant one full 3 or 4 squares of the same crop. That is the best. 3 or 4 squares, the same crop, following the square foot approach. And if I harvest all those squares, 3 to 4 squares, I plant with other crop. So I kind of keeping in blocks. And because of the space and the plants growing, there is no room for weeds. And also because of the pattern that we are using, whatever is out of the pattern is a weed. So sometimes we don't have time to recognize which is this a weed, is this chickweed, is this dandelion. So we just, whatever is out of the pattern, we just pull it out. Just pull it, and that's it. We don't have any problems with weeding. So square foot gardening, really, we managed to control the weeds to the minimum. There are no weeds. All right, so to sum up, square foot gardening pushes us to think in squares, not anymore in rows. And as I say, we very much work in trying to remember and to make the correlation between the amount of plants and the vegetable. So here, 16 carrots, radishes, scallions, 9 beets, spinach or turnips, 1 cabbage, 1 broccoli, 1 kale, or 4 lettuce, pak choy, garlic. So in internet, you are able to find all this space, the plant spacing. Now, you also might find that there are different plant spacings according to each gardener. For instance, I have moved from planting 4 lettuces to planting 5. So I will add 1 extra lettuce in the middle. Is this because...
Pablo?
Yep.
Sorry
Listening.
for the interruption. We have another question. If the garden bed is wider than 3 feet, is there a technique to harvest what might be in the center of the grid without managing the other crops around it?
Yes. So, for instance, usually in the center of my garden bed, I put my tall plants, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, because they are the tall, and also they take the longest to grow. And at the edge of the garden bed, I put these plants that are shorter, and they grow faster, like radishes, 45, 50 days are ready. onions or scallions, which are good as a companion planting for cabbage and broccoli, because aphids don't like onions, so aphids love cabbages and kale. So yes, I will say it's just in the way you can either put your crops across the garden bed or along the garden bed. So it's just how you also think where my plants will go. So yeah, I would put the crops that take the longest in the middle, and the take crops that grow faster on the edges along the garden bed.
Okay, thank you. I also want to let you know that this is already for 23rd.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
So almost there. The other thing I was going to motivate you is to garden year round. And for that, here I encourage you to build hoop houses. These are hoop houses. It's nothing else than a frame made by 2x2 lumber, 2 inches by 2 inches, and with some hoops pushed into it, or metal rods, and with a PVC or something, or PVC or lumber on the top to hold all the hoops. So the hoops don't bend inwards or outwards and everything collapses. So as you can see in this picture is the winter that we have here in Burnaby, and the garden beds, the hoop houses just stood with no problem. The advantage to have hoop houses is that keeps the excessive rain and is now out of the garden bed, so the soil doesn't get soaking wet during the fall. That's the reason that we can continue growing winter and early in the spring. Cold air and night frost, the frost stays on top of the hoop house, not on the plants, not on the soil, and the wind as well. Cold wind, the hoop houses protects the plants from the cold wind. So yeah, here in Burnaby, the hoop houses goes up by Halloween, because I know that after Halloween the weather gets so much soaking, so much wet, and the hoop houses stay until the night temperature goes above 10 degrees. So now here in Vancouver, we are talking about mid-May. By Victoria Day, I will remove the hoop houses. So that allows me to grow very early in February. I already can put my carrots, radishes, arugula in the ground, in the garden beds. I think that also could very much work in the northern part of BC. All right, briefly, curriculum links. Okay, how we can link what is going on in the garden to what we are teaching in classroom. So, for this, I have moved to cycles. In school, we teaching cycles. We teach the cycle of water, the cycle of soil or rocks, the CO2 cycle, the decomposition cycle, and the garden also has a cycle. So if we can link the garden cycle with what we are teaching inside as cycles as well, and we very much can make several connections. So the garden cycle starts with the soil preparation. To plant anything, you have to loosen the soil to plant, so soil preparation. Then you move to seedling and planting. Okay, you have your seeds or you have your plants. Then we move to what is called garden care: watering, weeding, pruning, putting stakings. If we are growing beans, we have to make a teepee. So all that's a garden care. After all this work that we have done, harvesting, very much important, harvesting, and whatever we do is not edible, we do composting. So in each of these phases, there's lots of links to do. Soil preparation, we can talk about soil types, man-made soil, natural soil, about seedings, what is needed for a germination of a seed, has to have warm temperature, air, and water. That's it. No, we don't need soil, no nutrients. For garden care, we water the soil, and pinching and pruning. For harvesting is very much about trying to keep separately. If you're harvesting leaves, you harvest in a separate bowl. If you're harvesting roots, you put in a different bowl. You don't mix those. So that is trying to teach that food safety. If you mix roots that have soil with leaves that have a wound, you will contaminate. All right. So food safety. Also, we try to make that the curriculum should be seasonal because the garden is seasonal. So, and then we can talk about seasons. We can talk about if you have some information about First Nations way to grow food, as well, very much can fit in these ideas of making a cycle. Here are some ideas. I already talked about arrays. For mathematics, we can calculate the number of seeds in each square, and as well, we can find how many squares we should plant and how many bunches of produce we can get from there. We focus on cycles, try to link the plant life cycle, water cycle, CO2 cycle. For that very much works for the primaries. For intermediates, I focus with systems. Systems need energy in order to work. What happens if there is no energy? What happens if my garden bed has no sunlight? Does photosynthesis still occurs? What's the greenhouse effect? Not the greenhouse gases, but the greenhouse effect. How the sun rays, when hits the soil, that energy, radiant energy transfers into heat energy, and how that affects the production and the growing of plants. And in science, pollinators and pollination, and the production of seeds. I think sometimes we just talk about pollinators. They take the honey, they make honey, the pollinators bring pollen from plant to another, but we kind of tend to forget that is what we call fertilization, and that fertilization produces seeds. So if there is no pollination, there is no seeds. And of course, seeds are being produced, and the plants are very clever. They surround them with delicious, fleshy part of the plant, which have the fruits, and that's what we eat, and how seeds are dispersed, and so we can link fruits and dispersion of seeds. All right, so I think we have some extra time for any questions. Hello.
Thank you so much, Pablo. That was amazing. I love all those ideas right at the end to talk to kids about all the curriculum. And yeah, I mean, parents can do it at home even right now. So that's super fun. So if you have any questions, you can just type them in the chat box, or we can take the questions. You can email communications@farmtoschoolbc.ca, and I can email them to Pablo. Oh, perfect. His email is there. So I will send out a recording of this webinar later. So if you have any questions later, we can definitely get in touch with Pablo or one of us, and we can get you some more information. So what I would love to do is, I'm just going to share my screen here, is I forgot I had one more, a couple more questions and Menti that I wanted to go over before we finish up here. So if you could go back to www.menti.com and use the code 334404 again, and let us know how you heard about the webinar. I'm just going to full screen this again. Beauty. It's just good to know what channels are working. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for those responses. So as you know, we have our, or as you may not know, oh, sorry, that was the wrong button. We have a monthly webinar at this point. So I'm not sure why it's not going to the next slide here. We have a monthly webinar, and we would like to know, okay, maybe this is the wrong order. No. I'm not sure why it's not popping up. Anyway, I'll let Claudia jump in here and tell you about the April one, but we would like to know if a more frequent webinar would work for you. And we'll just present this. We'll let you know about the next one at the end of April. And I'll send out a survey afterward. I'm not sure why my next questions aren't working there, but I'll just send out a follow-up.
We have the question already on our cell phone.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So and this reads: how did you hear about this webinar? Oh, we already answered that.
Yeah, I had a couple more about how
okay. Okay. In the meantime that you are taking care of that, I want to invite everybody. Sorry. First of all, thank you so much, Pablo, for the webinar.
You're welcome.
I think that this comes in a perfect time that we are going into the spring, and yes, we have kids at our homes, and probably many of us can start working in our backyards or small balconies and bringing this technique to our gardens and in company of kids. And thank you so much, everybody, to attend this webinar. And our next webinar will happen on April 29th, Small but Mighty, Farm to School in a Rural Remote Context. This will be delivered on April 29th at 3:30 p.m. It will be hosted by Nanaimo region. And all the information about this upcoming webinar you can find in through our Facebook page or website, farm2schoolbc.ca webinars webpage. And also, if you want to revisit this webinar, Pablo's webinar, we will post it in the following days as well, all the past webinar that we have been hosting during this last month. Ari, are we going with the questions, or?
Well, unfortunately, I have to share my screen to do it. So I'll just send up a follow-up. Just turn on my webcam here.
Okay.
Sorry about that, everyone. I'm not really sure what happened. I thought I had it already. So I'll send everybody a recording of the webinar from today, a copy of Pablo's slides, as well as a survey. And in the survey, we'll ask if you would like more webinars at this point, because we're all kind of stuck at home. So it would be nice to learn some gardening things in the springtime here. So
yes,
thank you, everybody, so much.
And if you want to be in contact directly with Pablo, Pablo posted his email address just on the chat box on the left side on the bottom of the screen, so you can write directly to him. So thank you so much, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, keep social distancing, and let's see you during our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.